Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Larry's Trackside teaser, teasing the Daytona 500 weekend for the NASCAR Cup Series, O'Reilly Series, and Craftsman Truck Series right here live on my X account, or you may be listening to afterwards either on YouTube or on Spotify. And if you are, please hit the subscribe, please hit the follow. That would be greatly appreciated. Do multiple videos and multiple lives also on X throughout the week. And yeah, expect me to also be live this weekend for the events as I begin to do my not really a preview show, more of a relaxed show on the weekend at noon on Saturday and Sunday. So tune into that because that will only be on X. It will not go on Spotify or YouTube afterwards because it's more of just a chillax show, talking with the chat, potentially just hanging out, getting ready for the races. All right, let's begin to preview this weekend at Daytona. Points racing is back for NASCAR this weekend, as it is Daytona weekend. Daytona 500 for the Cup Series. You have the United Rentals 300 for the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, formerly known as the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Then for the Craftsman Trucks, you have the Fresh from Florida 250. I assume that's referencing oranges. Could be watermelons. I think it's oranges, though. Don't quote me on that. And we also have ARCA this weekend as well. So it should be a pretty entertaining week. And it's speed weeks, even though it's speed day. Starts on Wednesday. We have a couple of things going on. Let's get to that. I think that should probably be the first thing we get to is the schedule for the weekend. This is what the weekend schedule is looking like for Daytona in the NASCAR world. All the practice sessions this weekend will be 50 minutes long. On Wednesday, we have Cup Series practice and Cup Series qualifying, both on Fox Sports 1. Cup Series practice at 10 a.m., and then Cup Series qualifying at 8 p.m. Of course, all these times are Eastern time. I find this very odd, 8 p.m. qualifying and then 10 a.m. practice. I'm pretty confused about that, to be honest. I think it's kind of weird that they had it set up like that, but that's what it is. On Thursday, we have Truck Series practice at 5 p.m., and then we have the Daytona 500 duels on Fox Sports 1. We have a pair of duels, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then on Friday, we have Truck Series qualifying on Fox Sports 1 at 3 p.m., followed by O'Reilly Auto Parts Series practice on the CW at 4:30. At 5:30, we have the second Daytona 500 practice session. And at this point, we know when we get to this second session, we know everybody that's in the race at that point. At 7:30, we have the Fresh from Florida 250 for the Truck Series on Fox Sports 1, and that will do it for Friday. And then we head in to Saturday, and Saturday at 10 a.m., we have the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series qualifying on the CW. Then we have the Daytona ARCA 200, the season opener for the ARCA Menard Series at noon on Fox. They got a Fox race, so good for them. And then we have the third and final Cup Series practice at 3 p.m. on Fox Sports 1. And then at 5 p.m., we'll have the United Rentals 300 on the CW. For that Cup Series practice, that's most likely when I'll end up being on for my live on X, is roughly around that time, maybe a little bit before that, depending on what happens in the ARCA race. And then on Sunday, of course, we have the 68th running of the Daytona 500, the Great American Race, at 2:30 p.m. on Fox. So a very entertaining schedule, I would say, ahead of us. I'm very much looking forward to the Daytona weekend. Could be a lot of craziness that happens. I just hope we have some good stories, some good winners. I hope we don't get William Byron 3 in a row. Nothing against William Byron. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But let's get to the weekend facts that we have for the 68th running of the Daytona 500. The stages will end at lap 65 for stage 1, 130 for stage 2, and then it is a 200-lap event. The track location, of course, is Daytona Beach, Florida. It's a 2.5-mile super speedway. The track opened back up in 1959, the first race was that year. The first running of the Daytona 500 on February 22nd was won by the legendary Lee Petty. The active win leader of the Daytona 500, of course, would be Dennis the Menace, Denny Hamlin, three-time Daytona 500 champion. But then last year's winner is trying to tie him and also go for three in a row in the Daytona 500, and that would be Willie B, William Byron, the iRacing Warrior. We'll see if he can win three in a row this weekend at Daytona. And then we have a couple of cool notable entries for this weekend. A couple of cool notable entries for the 500, but the trucks is going crazy. In the trucks, we have, of course, Cletus McFarland, who finally got approved today. He will be attempting to race that number 4 truck for Nice Motorsports. Then you have the number 7 of Michael McDowell for Spire. And then we have the return of Smoke, Tony Stewart, making actually his first Truck Series start at Daytona. A lot of people consider him the king of Daytona when it came to the Busch Series and the Nationwide Series back in the early 2000s, even a little bit into the early 2010s. So I'm very interested to see how Smoke does. And then you have probably my favorite person in the world driving the number 42 for Nice Motorsports, being Travis Pastrana. I am completely pumped for that. Pastrana is already locked into the show. Cletus will have to qualify his way in. The number 45 is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So you have Cletus McFarland, Travis Pastrana, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. all on the same race team for the Truck Series and the Fresh from Florida 250. That's the All-American team is what I would call it. And then we'll take a look at the number 62, driven by John Hunter Nemechek, racing for Friesen, going to be Stuart Friesen's teammate in the event. The number 75 will be driven by Corey LaJoie, and we've seen that 75 from Henderson Motorsports have some success at these super speedways. And then finally, driving the number 77 will be Carson Hocevar. Very interested to see how he does in that number 77 truck. And then pulling triple duty as we move on to the notable entries for the O'Reilly Series, there's really only one notable entry, and that would be Carson Hocevar, who's pulling triple duty, racing trucks, O'Reilly, and the Cup Series, driving the number 42 for Young Motorsports this weekend in the United Rentals 300. And then we'll take a look at the Cup Series, and all 5 of these drivers need to qualify their way into the Great American Race. You have Chandler Smith driving the number 36 for Front Row Motorsports. You have the number 40 of Justin Allgaier for Junior Motorsports, looking to make the second ever start for Junior Motorsports in the Cup Series. Of course, he did make that start in the 500 last year in the number 40 as well. Then you have J.J. Yaley in the number 44. I would also like to know B.J. McLeod and Casey Mears as well are going to be attempting to qualify into this race. You have Corey Heim in the number 67, making one of his 12 starts this season, or at least attempting to start for 2311 Racing, the number 67 Robin Hood Toyota, and then driving the number 99. Really cool to see the 99 back over at Roush, and that will be Corey LaJoie. If you're watching the video format, or if you're listening, I'll explain it a little bit more. The weekend weather report, it looks like Friday and Saturday are going to be clear from what I've seen. It looks like we're not going to get any rain on Friday, Saturday, but Sunday it looks like there is a decent chance of rain. I've seen anywhere from 30% up to 60% chance of rain for Sunday, so it's just something to be aware of. So I did also list Monday, and it looks like we most likely would get the show in on Monday if it came down to that point. And hopefully it doesn't. We always seem to get affected by weather for the Great American Race in some sort of way. And I really hope weather has no effect on the weekend. I hope we don't see a single drop of rain this weekend, whether it's during the actual weekend or it's Wednesday or Thursday. I don't want to see any rain affecting this race, whether that's potentially taking some drivers out that could have potentially made the race and they get eliminated just because they couldn't qualify because of rain. We've seen that before. It would really suck to get anything rained out this weekend. It's the biggest race of the year in NASCAR. I wouldn't say it's the biggest race in the world. I do think some people think that. I personally think it isn't the biggest race in the world, but it's definitely the biggest race in our world, and it's the race I personally look forward to the most every year, especially since my boy Rowdy Kyle Busch still has yet to win the event, and hopefully he can get the job done this year. Okay, before I really go through some favorites and kind of go through my picks and what are some things to expect in this race, I'm going to do something cool that I've added on to the Larry's Trackside teaser for this season. I mentioned it a little bit last week, but we're going to go through the Mount Rushmore of the Daytona 500, and we'll be doing this for every racetrack throughout the season. I'll be giving my personal Mount Rushmore for every racetrack and or crown jewel event. So this isn't all Daytona stats that I went through. It's just Daytona 500 stats that I went through for this Mount Rushmore. So let's go through the Mount Rushmore of the Daytona 500. All right. And we're going to have to start off with this guy. We got a legend of the sport, many consider to be probably a Mount Rushmore driver of the sport, and that would be Cale Yarborough. 4 wins in the Great American Race, 4 runner-up finishes, 10 top 5s, which is third all time, 14 top 10s, which is third all time, and 553 laps led in the Great American Race, which is fourth all time. And he was also involved in that fight in the infield, or that's what it's called. That's what they make the call of, but it's really right on the inside of 3 and 4. He could have won another one, and he's part of one of the biggest moments in NASCAR history. That moment really put our sport on the map, I would say. All right, let's take a look on who I have next on this list. And most people, I think, would consider this driver the greatest of all time. I personally wouldn't have him as the greatest of all time, but he is the king, and he's probably the king of the Great American Race, and that is Richard Petty. Of course, I mentioned earlier, his father, Lee Petty, won the inaugural Daytona 500. Well, his son, Richard Petty, came in here and won the Daytona 500 7 times. Insane numbers. 11 top 5s in the Great American Race, which is second all time. 16 top 10s, which is tied for first. 780 laps led in the Great American Race, which is first for the king. The king is the king of the Daytona 500. And then I think some people might be a little bit surprised about this next driver because he does only technically have 1 win in this event, but he's been so close so many times. He's always been one of the most dominating drivers at Daytona, especially in this Great American Race, and he has a bunch of fantastic finishes, but he only has that 1 win in 1998. And of course, I'm talking about Dale Earnhardt Sr., if it will pull up. I'm going to have to pull this up manually, it looks like. Dale Earnhardt Sr., 1 win in 1998, but I didn't even know this stat. This stat was kind of staggering, and that is 5 runner-up finishes in the Great American Race. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 second-place finishes in the Great American Race, which is first all time. He also has the most top 5s in the history of the Daytona 500 with 12. He's tied for first for the most top 10s with 16 with the king Richard Petty, and then he's second all time in laps led with 686 laps led in the Great American Race. Just insane stats from Dale Earnhardt, the Intimidator, who did only get that win in 1998 and probably one of the most, if not the most, iconic victory in the history of NASCAR, winning that 1998 Daytona 500. Of course, pulled down pit lane, and every pit crew member from every team walked out and wanted to give him a high five or shake his hand. They wanted to congratulate him because they know how hard he worked for this. They know how much he wanted it, and they knew how close he's came so many times in this event. It just seemed like no matter what happened near the end, no matter how good he was at the end of some of these races, he would just have issues. Something would go wrong. He freaking ran into a bird one year. It's just insane on everything he went through, and then finally got it done in 1998. All right, and then this last member of the Mount Rushmore, I think, would be controversial for some people, but I had to put him on the list, and he's currently the active win leader of the Daytona 500, and going through all the stats, and there was a couple people that came just short. I was debating between this guy and then a couple other drivers, but I had to pick him. Dennis the Menace. Denny Hamlin is my final driver on the Mount Rushmore for the Daytona 500. Denny Hamlin had 3 wins, 8 top 5s, 8 top 10s, and 490 laps led in the Daytona 500, which would put him 5th all time. So I think the first 3 for me were very easy. Cale Yarborough, Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt. I was satisfied on those. And then I was debating between Hamlin and Jeff Gordon pretty much for that 4th and final spot. And I had to give it to Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin still has a couple years potentially left ahead of him in his career. So maybe he can get a couple more Daytona 500 victories. We will have to see. But Cale Yarborough, Dale Earnhardt, Richard Petty, and Denny Hamlin are my Mount Rushmore for the Daytona 500. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who is your Mount Rushmore for the Daytona 500? I'd be very surprised if you didn't have 3 out of those 4. I would not be surprised if a lot of you put in Gordon instead of Hamlin. I really had a big debate about that, and I eventually decided on Denny Hamlin. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. All right. Now that we're done with the schedule, we're done with the facts, we're done going through the Mount Rushmore, let's go through a couple of favorites, a couple of underdogs to take a look at for the NASCAR Cup Series, and then I will be making my Craftsman Truck Series, my O'Reilly Series, and my NASCAR Cup Series pick for the weekend. A couple of favorites to look at for the NASCAR Cup Series in the Daytona 500. Have to take a look at Willie B. William Byron. William Byron's won the last 2 events. I'm still one of the people that last year, obviously, William Byron won it, but I'm still one of the people that think that Alex Bowman should have won the Daytona 500. I know there's still probably a lot of debate out there about that. I felt like when the caution came out, it should have went to Bowman, but that's in the past now. Byron is the winner of the last 2 Daytona 500s, and he's a great super speedway driver. He has to be one of the favorites. I just mentioned him, Alex Bowman. I think Alex Bowman is very much under the radar. I don't think he's won a super speedway event yet, and he usually does pretty well. He's usually running up in the top 10 throughout a good amount of the event. So he's a guy I feel like is under the radar that a couple people can maybe take a look at. Got to take a look at Team Penske as a whole. So that would be Austin Cindric, Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano. Penske just seems to have a lot of success on the big tracks, on the super speedways, the Fords in general. So I would include Josh Berry, who's kind of a Penske car as well. And I would take a look at the RFK Fords, Brad Keselowski, Chris Buescher, Ryan Preece, fresh off his victory at the Clash, maybe even Corey LaJoie. And Corey LaJoie is a very, very talented super speedway racer. I think that's his highest strength. If he can make it into the race, he could potentially be a threat to make it into the main event as well. A couple other favorites I would probably take a look at is Kyle Larson. Like Kyle Larson, I'm one of those people that thinks he's not necessarily the greatest super speedway racer, but over the last couple of years, he finds himself near the front at the end of a lot of these events and tends to not get the finish that he may deserve. He tends to be one of the better cars throughout the race, but just doesn't quite get the finish that I think he deserves or wants at the end of these super speedway events. So he's somebody to watch out for. Obviously, got to take a look at Denny Hamlin. I was just talking about him being part of the Mount Rushmore, the Daytona 500. He's looking for his 4th Daytona 500. And after the tough offseason that he's had ever since the championship race, I think that would be a really cool moment for him. Of course, Rowdy, Kyle Busch. He is considered the best driver currently in the sport who has yet to win the Great American Race, and he's came close many times, many times. We saw it with Earnhardt for many years. Luckily, he got the 98 Daytona 500. We saw it with Tony Stewart for a long time. That still breaks my heart that he never won a Daytona 500 in his big-time Cup Series career. And now we have Kyle Busch, who's obviously on the back half of his career. Can he finally get the Daytona 500? We'll have to see. Then a couple of underdogs that I personally would take a look at. Michael McDowell is the first one that comes to mind. He is a great super speedway racer. He's the right type of aggressive, but at the same time, he does Similar things to Brad Keselowski. I forgot to even mention Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace I'd consider a favorite too. Like Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, Bubba Wallace. And I would put Michael McDowell in that same crowd, that these four guys are extremely talented at super speedways, at Daytona and Talladega, and they have great knowledge of it. But at the same time, they might be a little bit too aggressive at times with their bump drafts, and most likely one of these four guys is going to cause a big accident at some point in the Great American Race, whether that's Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, Bubba Wallace, or Michael McDowell, because they all get overly aggressive with their bump drafting. But to win at a super speedway, I feel like you need to be really aggressive. That's why some people would consider those four to be some of the best super speedway racers. So it could go good or bad with them. They could end up in victory lane, or they could end up behind the wall 20 laps in by the way they drive. We'll have to see. A couple other underdogs I would have to take a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Austin Dillon as well. Two great super speedway racers. I think most people that watch NASCAR throughout the year know that these two are always going to be a threat on the super speedways, even though they're not a threat throughout most of the season. Maybe even I would even take a look at Justin Allgaier. To be honest, I think Justin Allgaier is a very good super speedway racer. He's not even locked in to the show yet, so I would definitely take a look at him to potentially be a pretty big underdog to get the win, maybe even a top 5, top 10 in the Great American Race. So we'll have to see about that. All right, right before I get to my picks, I almost forgot. Let me make my elimination picks. I'm gonna pick which drivers I think are going to advance to the Great American Race. Let me make sure I don't forget any names. I'm gonna pull this up here. I just want to make sure I don't forget any names here. But all right, I think I got it. So the four I think that are going to miss the Great American Race, and it pains me to say some of these guys. BJ McLeod, big fan of BJ McLeod. He's a racer's racer. I just love the guy. I think the guy has a great attitude. I think he's a lot of fun. I think he personifies NASCAR in so many ways, but I don't see him making the event. I think it's very stout competition for the Daytona 500 qualifying this season, and I would say the exact same thing for Casey Mears. Big fan of him. He's not necessarily the picture perfect NASCAR guy, but he's a picture perfect motorsport guy, of course, from a big family of racing. Casey Mears, and he's been returning to NASCAR over the last couple of years, but I don't see him making the Great American Race in the 66. And then I would say the exact same thing as well for JJ Yeley in the 44. I just think those three drivers aren't in good enough equipment and good enough cars with how stout the competition is this year to make it in to the Daytona 500. I just don't see any of those three guys making it unless somebody wrecks out, unless something happens throughout the duels or something that opens up the door for one of them to make the event, which leaves us down to 5 drivers for those final 4 spots. I can see it really going any way, but that 4th driver I'm probably going to have to eliminate would be Anthony Alfredo, Fast Pasta, driving the number 62 for Beard Motorsports, which is, they pretty much make it like another RCR car for these super speedway events. I just don't see him beating out the other competitors that we see competing to make the Daytona 500. And Fast Pasta, I think, is going to have a very good year for Viking Motorsports in the O'Reilly Series, along with his teammate Parker Retzloff. I think they're going to have a lot of success this season. But I don't see him making it. Like I said, if a wreck happens or something crazy happens in qualifying, who knows? One of these 4 guys that I just mentioned that I don't think are going to make it might slip in. But if everything goes according to plan on what we think is going to happen, I think we have to expect these 4 drivers that I'm about to name make the Great American Race. And of course, Chandler Smith, Front Row Motorsports, and Fords in general have just had so much success in qualifying, not just for the Great American Race, but just for super speedways in general. So I personally suspect he'll be one of the 2 drivers that qualifies in 2 drivers qualify in through qualifying, and the other 2 drivers come from the duels. The top finishing driver from each of those duels that were going to get eliminated advance into the Daytona 500. So I would suspect Chandler Smith is one of the 2 fastest go or go home drivers. And the second fastest go or go home driver would be another Ford. I would predict Corey LaJoie. I mentioned Corey LaJoie, a very strong super speedway racer. And the Fords just have so much success in qualifying. I'm going to be very surprised if these 2 aren't the 2 drivers that advance to the Daytona 500 through qualifying. And then the 2 I suspect to race their way in to the Great American Race through the duels would be Justin Allgaier, a.k.a. Little Gator, the driver of the number 40 for Junior Motorsports, looking to make the second start for Junior Motorsports in the Cup Series in the Daytona 500. And then the other one would be another Corey Heim time, making one of his 12 starts for 2311 Racing, making his first start of the season in that number 67 in the Great American Race. So those are the 4 I have in. The 4 I have out. Of course, the other go or go home driver would be Jimmy Johnson, but he will be getting the provisional. He's automatically locked into the race, so he's not something we have to worry about. So 4 in, 4 out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Which 4 drivers do you have advancing to the Daytona 500, and which 4 drivers do you have going home after the duels on Thursday night? Okay, now let's get to my picks. Let's get to my picks for the Great American Race, the Daytona 500, and of course the O'Reilly Series and the Craftsman Truck Series. I was going to make a graphic, but the odds still haven't been put up by DraftKings, and I kind of forgot about it right before I made the video. I would have just put it up without the DraftKings odds, but I forgot right before I went live. I remembered. But my 3 picks for this weekend will be for the Craftsman Truck Series. I'm going to have to take Carson Hocevar. Carson Hocevar, he's my pick to win in the number 77 for Spire Motorsports in the Fresh from Florida 250. There's a couple of guys I was really debating for this win. I was even taking a look at Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Lane Riggs, Chandler Smith. There were some guys I was definitely taking a look at to win this event, but I'm gonna have to take Carson Hocevar. I even took a look at Michael McDowell. The only reason I didn't pick Michael McDowell is because he just doesn't have as much experience in the trucks as someone like Carson Hocevar. So he's my pick. Carson Hocevar is my pick to win the Fresh from Florida 250 for the Craftsman Truck Series. And then I'm going to go to the O'Reilly Series and the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in the United Rentals 300. And this one is, I'd say, probably a pretty boring pick, but it's not necessarily the pick I think you may be expecting, because I'm not picking someone from Richard Childress Racing, but I will be picking the driver of the number 7, Justin Allgaier. Lil Gator, he's my pick to win the United Rentals 300 this weekend at Daytona. I personally would love to see Sheldon Creed go out there and finally get a victory, but my pick has to be Justin Allgaier, Lil Gator, to win at Daytona in the United Rentals 300. And then we have the Great American Race, the Daytona 500 on Fox, hopefully on Sunday. Hopefully we don't get any rain getting in the way of the Great American Race. But my pick to win the Daytona 500, he gets it done. He finally gets the job done. Rowdy, Kyle Busch, and anybody that knows me knew I was going to pick Kyle Busch no matter what for this event. He's came close so many freaking times. He needs to get the monkey off his back. I was hoping to be there this weekend, but I am broke as hell, so I am not in Daytona. And the last time that I planned to go to an event, and I just couldn't go because I didn't have the money or the resources. The last time that happened, where I planned hard on going to an event and I didn't end up going, it was the very last race at Auto Club, aka California Speedway, and Kyle Busch was the winner of that event. So Kyle Busch is my pick. Rowdy is my pick to win the Daytona 500, the 68th running of the Daytona 500 at Daytona International Speedway, hopefully on Sunday afternoon in Daytona Beach. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who is your pick to win the Truck Series, the O'Reilly Series, and the Great American Race this weekend? All right. Right before I go, I feel like I kind of have to do this a little bit. So bear with me here for a second. You can tune out now if you want to, because there's no more NASCAR talk. I will be back for Larry's Trackside teaser next week as we preview Echo Park Speedway. But I wanted to dedicate this show to my best friend. I lost my dog yesterday, my dog Jack. Um, I lost him yesterday morning. He was my best friend in the whole world. And I just wanted to dedicate this preview show to him. He was only 7 years old. He passed away suddenly, perfectly healthy 2 weeks ago, and started to have some heart issues over the last 2 weeks, and just brought him to the emergency room on Saturday morning, and early Sunday morning at 3:30 I got a phone call, and he passed away. Hold your loved ones tight, whether that's a loved one, like a person, like a mom, a dad, or grandparents, brother, sister, or best friend, or man's best friend. I loved that dog more than anything. So I just wanted to dedicate this show to Jack. I love you, and I miss you so much. All right, but I appreciate anybody who did tune in to this first edition of, well, we had one for Bowman Gray, I guess, but the first real one for the Daytona 500. I appreciate anybody who did tune in. If you're watching on X, I will be live again later with the Pace Car Boys on the Pace Car Boys X account, as we will be having Hit the Pace Car later today at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. But once again, I appreciate anybody who tuned in on X, or if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on Spotify. I greatly appreciate it. And please subscribe, follow, or whatever. I greatly appreciate it. But if you don't end up seeing me later, have a great rest of your day. I'm Trackside Larry saying peace.